to welcome my colleague and friend Joe Chuman to give us his platform on Life is Not a Jigsaw Puzzle, and I'm really anxious to hear what you mean by that. I could tell you all about him, but I think you know a great deal about him already. There's something new about him, however, and he will reference this, and that is his participation in New Jersey on gun violence prevention. He is a rabble-rouser from way back, and so now he has taken the fight to the State House in Trenton and really organized not only the society in Teaneck, but also the whole community. So here is our friend, colleague, and leader, Joe Chuman.
For that very gracious introduction, and I've said many times I'm always sustained to have my colleague here who is so devoted to this community and its ideals. Let me extend, he's left the room so I can say this without embarrassing him. I really want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Jerry Rank, whom I've known throughout his long career here at the New York Society, and I think we in the Society have been doubly blessed by having Jerry with us. Not only have we been the beneficiaries of his talent and his artistry so very often on Sunday mornings and at other times, but I think we are also very thankful, or at least I am, because in our music director, we have someone who in effect has really believed in our ideals and has stood with us. He's really one of us. Yes, I think it's so nice to have someone performing that function who is also dedicated to what we stand for most. And I want to, of course, on this lovely day, extend best wishes to all of you who are mothers. All of us have mothers, or have had mothers, and that brings us together in that regard. That's a point of common humanity. And I do hope all of you who are mothers and grandmothers that your kids and grandchildren are especially nice to you. And if they're not, report them to me and I'll set them straight. I want to talk this morning about life and philosophy and ethics, both in a philosophical vein, but also one that veers into the personal. And I've entitled my address, Life is Not a Jigsaw Puzzle. Well, in developing my platform addresses, I should say I tend to scrupulously avoid material that I have used before. But after 400 plus addresses, you really fetch for original material. It becomes a challenge. I got to admit. This time, therefore, I want to begin my talk with an exception because I think it's such a good lead-in to the ideas I want to discuss this morning. My topic takes me back to an address I gave 6 years ago. In fact, I think I gave it here at the platform in New York also. It was an address on Darwinism and evolution. I began my address with a reference to the writing of the great evolutionary scientist and science writer, the now late Stephen Jay Gould. As many who followed Gould's work know, he had a reputation for his love of baseball, an enterprise which, as a very devoted fan, he took very seriously. I wrote in my address back then, quote, several years ago, the famed paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould, in one of his monthly articles in Natural History magazine, opined on the origins of baseball. As every American knows, our national pastime was invented in the 19th century by Civil War hero Abner Doubleday, and the first game was played on a makeshift field in Cooperstown, New York, where baseball's Hall of Fame now stands. What Stephen Jay Gould lays bare, I went on to say in his essay, is that this often repeated piece of American folklore was a totally fabricated myth. And Abner Doubleday would not have known the difference between a baseball bat and a knitting needle. As Gould informs us, the truth about baseball is far less captivating. Rather than being invented by a hero in Captain Doubleday, who fired the first iconic shot for the Union Army in defense of Fort Sumter, was certainly a hero, baseball, in fact, evolved slowly from colonial times out of British bat and ball games. In short, the game of baseball had no identifiable origin in time or place, and no founder, famous or otherwise. As Gould tells us, quote, for some time, this is him speaking, we are powerfully drawn to the subject of beginnings. We yearn to know about origins, and we readily construct myths when we do not have data, or we suppress the data in favor of legend when a truth strikes us as too commonplace. Stories about beginnings come in only two basic modes. An entity either has an explicit point of origin, a specific place of time and place of creation, or else it evolves and has no definable moment of entry into the world. Baseball evolved from a plethora of previous stick and ball games. It has no true Cooperstown and no Doubleday. Yet we seem to prefer the alternative model of origin by a moment of creation, for then we can have both heroes and sacred places, so spoke Stephen Gould. I go on to say, although Gould's article discusses little other than baseball, his readers certainly know that this discussion of baseball's origins is primarily a stand-in for something else. What Gould is clearly trying to provide by invoking the origin of baseball as a parallel is one speculation on why the theory of evolution is so difficult for so many Americans to accept, and why creationism, which to any thinking person ought to be rejected as totally counterfactual and preposterous, is so broadly accepted. End quote. So ends my introduction to that address. I want, with this address, to use Gould's observation of how we gravitate to origins and shy away from fuzzier ideas such as evolution to make a broader point about how we think about life and values more generally. Perhaps the most basic function of our minds is to organize the world around us in understandable and usable ways. There can be no doubt that the reality we live in, primordially speaking, is chaotic. And in order to survive and thrive, we need to put the stamp of order on this chaos. We need to live in a world that makes sense in terms of time and space, the sequence of events, in cause and effect, and in many other ways. If our cave-dwelling ancestors could not develop an organized sense of perspective, space, distance, and speed, the spears that they launched would never have hit their targets, and the human species would not have survived beyond its infancy. If the world we confronted were nothing but mere chaos, we would mentally, in short order, lapse into insanity. Reality would be meaningless and overwhelmingly threatening. We control and tame reality first by understanding it. When we say that we understand something, we mean that we have taken otherwise a disorganized hodgepodge of ideas and fit them together in an organized way. And when we do this, we emotionally move from a state of relative disquiet and tension to one of momentary ease and comfort. Just as we gravitate to origins, so we like our ideas to be clear, distinct, and fit together very neatly. And without this organizing function of mind, we could not, as mentioned, physically survive. This organizing capacity of the mind is the strongest pillar of our survival, and we look to its greatest refinement in reason and science to push ahead further the flourishing of our species. The human intellect and imagination are very powerful. And throughout human history, philosophers and scientists and religious thinkers too have used that internal organizing capacity of mind to think about human relations, about the future, and how, ethically speaking, society can be best organized. This is what I'm getting. Just as our minds seek to organize different experiences and ideas into an organized whole, so many creative thinkers have framed blueprints about how reality, in the ultimate sense, is truly structured. These blueprints project a reality in which all loose ends will be sewn together, in which all problems and mysteries that confront us will be solved. All the different values that keep people warring with each other will be overcome, and harmony, not discord, will permeate the human condition. These visions, of which there have been many and remain many, presuppose several things. First, that all the problems that humanity confronts are indeed solvable. And second, once these problems are overcome and all mysteries are banished, the answers found will all fit neatly together into one huge cosmic jigsaw puzzle. Just as physicists search for a unified field theory, one single law which will explain how all the forces governing subatomic particles hold together, so such moral blueprints describe the perfect moral life, founded on a correct understanding of how the social universe is organized and governed. This way of thinking concludes that the reason we suffer so much frustration, the reason why we have so much war and contention, is that we haven't yet found the right answers to our problems. Once we do, and the truth which is out there is uncovered, human society will fall into place, and peace and harmony will reign. Another way to state this is that humankind has long harbored the powerful hope and wish that the human condition at some time in the future, and it may be very far in the future, is perfectible. Again, only if we can get it right and find the right rules and formulas by which to organize society and structure our relations with one another. Such ideas, and indeed we should call them, can call them, and do call them utopian ideas, have had a very powerful influence in shaping the way in which we think about the human condition and its future. Among the greatest expositors of such ideas have been the Greek thinkers Socrates, Plato, and the Greek Stoics. We can think of the social planners who built utopias in the New World, such as Robert Owen and his like. And there was, of course, Karl Marx and the theory of a classless society brought on by revolution led by the proletariat. And in the religious world, the prevailing suppositions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam is that the human condition is in fact problematic. But if one obeys the dictates of ultimate truth revealed by God, then the woes of the human condition will be overcome, and man will be restored to paradise, to heaven, or enter the Messianic age, or whatever other metaphor for perfection the religions put forward. There are major strands of humanism which are guided by this ideal of perfection as well. Modern humanism is a child of the European Enlightenment. And many philosophers of the Enlightenment who were intoxicated, simply intoxicated by the power of reason, felt that it was reason that could overcome superstition and prejudice, banish ignorance, end blind obedience to dogmas, and in time bring about a free, just, and harmonious world. All that was needed was the ability to identify principal human needs and discover the means of satisfying them, and in time a virtual heaven on earth would be created. This thinking of the 18th century laid the groundwork for the progressivism of the 19th century, which was perhaps the most optimistic century in human history. Indeed, our own Felix Adler is an exponent of this progressivism. Adler spoke continuously of the ethical ideal, that the ideal, whether he believed that the ideal, however, is attainable, is a debatable question. But there is no question that he believed that beyond this world of blood, sweat, and tears, there was an ideal realm which is truly real and needs to serve as the template to how we should strive to order our lives in the world we have here and now. Of all these visions of perfection, these utopian blueprints, philosophical and religious, perhaps the clearest is found in the thought of the ancient Greek luminary Plato. Plato elaborates his notion of utopia in his Republic, in which he demonstrates that he is no Democrat. He is no Democrat in part because he believed that democracy is in essence ruled by the mob. It is messy, disorganized, and the mob is not to be trusted. And to tell you the truth, when I testified on gun safety before the New Jersey Senate in Trenton on Tuesday, April 30th, in the presence of 400 Second Amendment zealots, amid their booing, shouting, and catcalls, and the ruckus that they created, I can begin to have some sympathy for Plato's point. For Plato, an ideal society, and Plato believes most literally in the existence, the real existence out there of ideals. He was fascinated by mathematics and its purity and perfection. He believes in ideals, that those ideals must be based on justice. And justice pertains, he says, when everyone knows his or her place in society and no one attempts to usurp the place or the role that is not his. So at the bottom of society are the slaves. Above them at the next stratum are the merchants. Above them are the class of soldiers and administrators. And at the very top of this pyramid, very small that it is, are the rulers, the sovereigns, the kings. These rulers are trained to be the best and the brightest. They are schooled, separated from their families, in mathematics and philosophy and the other arts. They can see further than other people do. In fact, by virtue of their philosophical training, they, unlike others, unlike us who live in the shadows and in relative ignorance, they, on the other hand, have access to absolute truth. And it is this capacity that entitles them to rule. For Plato, the head of society must be an especially trained philosopher. Maybe he liked that because he himself was a philosopher, therefore saw himself at the top. The perfect society, he proclaimed, is the orderly society, in which each knows his place, and therefore, when they do, justice and harmony will reign. Well, though Plato's vision is and should be very unattractive to us, it is a highly developed example of the quest for an orderly and peaceful human future, which has been such a powerful force in human history, given the frustrations we endure and the hard reality that the lives of many human beings seem so the hard reality that the lives of so many human beings seem so tedious at best, and for many more avail of tears. The yearning for a perfect society and the utopian schemes and glorious visions that accompany it may be in great measure an answer to the observation so brilliantly made by Henry David Thoreau that the mass of men, in truth, lead lives of quiet dissipation. That is a brilliant insight into these conditions. Everybody is cheery on the surface, but scratch the surface, and you see a great deal of woe and desperation and sadness and deep tragedy in the human condition. Well, this is very interesting. At some point, you may be saying to yourself that this talk perhaps is interesting in a historical or theoretical sense, but what does it have to do with me? Well, in the second part of my address, which I'll begin to deliver right now, I want to move to the personal, indeed, speak rather personally about myself and my personal philosophical evolution and journey. When I was younger, I held to these political and social ideals and was very inspired by them. I think I wasn't as uncritical as some of my more naive compatriots on the left, but I nevertheless believed that if we got it right, we could hurry society's march to its destined perfected function. The 1960s were rife with utopian thinkers, large and small. And so I read Marx and Engels, C. Wright Mills, Herbert Marcuse, Paul Goodman, Port Huron statement. I read the emerging feminists, Betty Friedan, and particularly Germaine Greer. I read the humanistic psychologists, Abraham Maslow, Carl Rogers, Rollo May, and indeed I read the entire works of Erich Fromm, who inspired my thought probably more than anyone else. All of these thinkers were part of the enthusiasm of the age, and I was intellectually and politically caught up in it. All of them were optimistic about the future. All of them held forth that the notion that society suffered its ills, it did so, in fact, because of bad institutions, bad ideas, wrong policies, and wrong ways of thinking. Essentially, what needed to be done was to get rid of bad institutions and create new ones and new forms of social living based on correct ideas. And voila, the giant cosmic jigsaw puzzle would fall into place, and humanity would enter into a new stage free of the evils and oppressions of the past. Not right away, perhaps, but with the unfolding of time. If you laid the groundwork with the right ideas, got rid of bad institutions that made people bad, replaced them with good institutions, in time, indeed, a harmonious age would follow. If truth be told, I no longer believe this. For one thing, it has become apparent to me that while utopianism has aroused the hearts of men and women as to the potential greatness of the human being, and has stood against such religious notions that man is intrinsically evil and besotted in sin, the idea of a perfected humanity, when put into practice, has led to among the greatest excesses of bloodletting and oppression. The reasons for this are easy to see. If one believes that there is one overarching solution to human problems, and one holds that solution in one's hand, then there is assuredly no cost too high to obtain it. For what could not be sacrificed to make mankind just, happy, creative, and harmonious forever? If I hold the blueprint for the ideal and perfect society in my hands, then what are we to do with outliers, with those who do not or choose not conform to that blueprint? The answer is clear and simple. We simply do away with it. And upon such reasoning, Hitler could exterminate those that did not conform to the Aryan ideal and for whom there was no place in the 1,000-year Reich. Or Stalin, Mao, or Pol Pot could execute their many millions, tens of millions, who got in the way of building a classless society. Utopianism is inspiring, yes, but impractical. but in practice, potentially very, very dangerous. To dig more deeply, the cosmic jigsaw puzzle implies that all ideas and all values can harmoniously fit together if the right laws or values of social organization can be found. This harmony may be true for scientific ideas or mathematical equations, or as Jerry had just told us before, for aesthetic principles of harmony and so forth, but I no longer believe that it is so when we talk about social values and the social arena. To put it bluntly, to put it very bluntly, different people truly believe and value different things, and those differences simply may not be neatly reconcilable. To think otherwise, I believe, is either to base one's beliefs on wishful thinking, on arrogance, narcissism, an imperialistic attitude, or perhaps a blindness to the values that other people hold. I am not saying, and here I have to be very nuanced, I am not saying that we should abandon our ideals. Idealism is essential to keep us inspired and to lend a well-deserved edge of nobility to our most important endeavors. We need ideals to sustain our hopes and our highest aspirations. I believe in ideals, but I don't believe in ideals as Plato, or please forgive me, as Felix Adler did. I don't believe that ideals are really real, in fact, more real than the natural world we inhabit, which is a view that Adler and Plato shared in common. Rather, I think I'm closer in my thought about ideals to that of the great humanist John Dewey. John Dewey believed in ideals, but he believed in them as imaginary constructs that are born out of our problems and frustrations. We encounter problems, he said, and then we use our imagination to frame ideals that we can use to inspire us to get beyond these problems, and so incrementally we move ahead. But most of all, I believe the idealism we espouse that we do should not be totalistic. We should be wary of grand theories and blueprints, and we should not mislead ourselves into believing that our ideals as they are can be imposed on society in short order right now. We need our ideals to set our sights in the right direction and to keep us motivated. Ideals, again, are useful tools, but their realization, I believe, is not possible for us, and we should be mindful of that fact. It is my view that whatever improvement is in store for human society will come as a result of modest incremental steps of adjustment and improvement. When I speak of different people having different values, values which in the final analysis do not harmonize with each other, I can perhaps best use my current struggle for greater restrictions on access to guns as a very good example. My position in this debate, which is now a national debate, not now at the state level, my position on this is, on the advisability of gun control, is based on a particular philosophy of government, the nature of rights, and ultimately the place of human beings in society and the very nature of human nature itself. In briefest terms, I see government as a creation of the people that can and should play a supportive role in protecting the security of all persons in society. I have great respect for fundamental rights and freedoms, but acknowledge the necessity of regulating and modifying rights when they conflict with other rights. I also believe that rights must be morally matched with social responsibilities and duties towards others. In this sense, while I highly prize the individual, I affirm that the individual is deeply embedded in society, and the idea of the individual has neither meaning nor existence outside of society. In other words, I believe as a truth of human nature that the self, to a very great degree, is social, that the self is social. In other words, despite my very high regard for individualism, I am in fact a communitarian who greatly prizes obligations as well as rights, affirms the social nature of man, and the necessary role of government as an expression of that social nature. When I look at my adversaries in the debate over gun regulation, I extrapolate from their arguments, and on that Tuesday I heard hours of their arguments. I extrapolate the following. They tend to see government as an oppressive and potentially inimical and not benign force that stands over and against their rights. They tend to see rights as absolute and therefore resist their regulation in any form. And from what I can see, they prize the individual over and above society rather than organically embedded within it. In other words, they present themselves as individualistic to a very high degree, and reveal a libertarian view that prizes the atomized individual prior to and outside of the matrix of social obligations. Whereas I tend towards a communitarian view of the person, they represent a philosophy which articulates a very strong commitment to libertarianism. Well, my point in this comparison is that when it comes to our most fundamental worldviews and our philosophies of society and the individual, my philosophy and theirs may simply be, at bottom, irreconcilable. It would be nice to think that their view and mine could ultimately harmonize with each other if some overarching principle could be found. But I don't believe that it could. In short, as elegant as it may be to dwell on it, there is no harmonious ideal, no cosmic jigsaw puzzle, where all values fit together neatly. In other words, the world is, and I believe will remain, a messy place with jagged edges, wherein different people will continue to value different things, and a certain degree of strife and struggle will always be with us. I should mention that while I have given up on the ideal of perfection, I have by no means given up on my commitment to progressivism and an improved human future. And to be very, very confessional, one problem that I confront, and I suspect many of you might be able to identify with this, at least I hope I'm not alone, is if you are a progressive and you indeed move away or basically transform your view, not move away, but transform it, the question you always have to ask is, am I getting more conservative or am I getting wiser? Okay, I'd like to believe I'm getting wiser, okay, but that's a problem that honestly, forces me to ask, and I hope I'm not alone in terms of dealing with that. I've given up on the idea of perfection, but I've got to say, I've by no means given up on my commitment to progressivism and an improved human future. It's deep in my character. The pervasiveness of human suffering and injustice demands that we need to work for a world that is far better than it is. We will always be confronted with decisions, and we can work to make those choices that stand the best chance of rendering the lives of others freer of oppression. Perfection may not be in the cards for us, I argue, but by small steps we can work to make life less harsh. Moreover, the fact that people will continue to value ends in life which are irreconcilable with others does not mean that we cannot find ways to at least live with each other. Differences do not have to be resolved through mutual annihilation. I do believe that if we cannot agree on ultimate values, we can agree, in fact, on common structures that allow us to live together with others whose values differ without active violence or aggression. There is enough, I believe, that all human beings do, in fact, hold in common to allow us to coexist, recognizing the humanity of the other, even as we hold vastly different and mutual irreconcilable views of life. So in terms of ultimate principles, we may never be able to harmonize with others, but that doesn't mean that we don't have enough in common to create practical and political structures whereby we can indeed live together with others reasonably, amicably, even as we agree to disagree with them. That, by the way, to be technical, makes me a type of social and political pluralist. I believe that there is a plurality of values, but that does not necessarily forbid the capacity to live together with others who hold those different values. As I have grown older, I must admit that I have become less enchanted by ideologies that make broad sweeping evaluations of what is good or bad for all individuals. As I have gotten older and experienced more, I have become more of a morally invested pragmatist, I might say. I want to see which choices and policies we adopt really do improve the lives of those whom they are meant to help. This may not be, admittedly, as exciting or as sexy as declaring utopian revolution, okay? But I would argue that my viewpoint is not nothing either, and I think that it is more firmly based in reality. I remain, I should say, very inspired by the words of the great humanist Albert Camus, who was actively committed to the French resistance during the Great War, when he wrote that, quote, "We may not be able to create a world in which no child is tortured, but we can create a world in which fewer children are tortured." And I would argue that such a world is indeed very much worth fighting for. But I'm still dwelling here on the social and political. I would like to end my talk by relating some of these ideas to the way in which we might think about our personal lives and goals as well. As I am not a utopian when it comes to society, so I am not on the personal dimension either. Life, I believe, is a mix of triumphs and failures, of fulfilled hopes and lots of frustration. There are moments of great achievement and failure too. There are times when we are productive and times when we are sluggish and mired in useless incapacity. There are dreams realized and dreams denied. There are times when we glory in our confidence and relative freedom from inefficiency and insecurity, and there are times of lethargy and doubt. There are times when we reach the heights of great joy and exult in our power and mastery, and there are times of great loss and feelings of being overwhelmed by life, simply being overwhelmed by life and its demands. And there are just a lot of experiences in between which don't rise much above the ordinary, the routine, and to be brutally honest, sometimes the boring too. Our lives have their wonderful high points, our achievements and triumphs to be sure, but much of life, and I would think the greater share of it to be realistic, is just a lot of coping. Much of life, I think, is adjustment, management, and constant repair. As the great German philosopher Immanuel Kant had once observed in a moment of insight, quote, "Out of the crooked timber of humanity, no straight thing has ever been made." End quote. That's a beautiful, I think, characterization of the human condition. Out of the crooked timber of humanity, no straight thing has ever been made. The Eastern philosophies, I should say, to bring in a different viewpoint, do promote the ideals of moksha and nirvana, states in which we liberate ourselves from attachment and desire, and so free ourselves from the incumbent pain and suffering that comes with the necessary frustration and loss. But in those philosophies is also the notion of countless rebirths. So the chances that you will attain that ideal in any one lifetime, indeed, are vanishingly remote. You have thousands of lifetimes in which to reach that ideal. It doesn't come easily at all, and in most of your lifetimes, you're just going to have to slug it along like the rest of us. Okay? I am not saying that our personal lives cannot be better than they are, that we cannot find greater contentment as we journey through life. I think we can, and in fact we do. Cumulative life experience and the process of growing older do bring for many a greater sense of self-confidence and greater serenity at some level in the understanding of what we cannot change, and making, therefore, our peace with that. But however we grow, there will always be problems to solve and frustrations to endure and simply to manage. I personally don't believe that there's a formula that we can follow that will make for happiness. I don't think that life is reducible to formulas or rules or following a sequence of prescribed steps. In the final analysis, we cannot bootstrap ourselves out of the human condition. Just as the mind gravitates toward a point of origin for baseball and human creation, a point which doesn't exist, so there is no point, I believe, of perfection in human life. Life is an experience and a process, and always in flux, and it is not a point of arrival. In closing, I am not suggesting that there cannot be gentler approaches to living that lead overall to greater contentment. While humanism does not prescribe a specific path or method to a happier life, it does suggest that certain directions are preferable to others. Certainly, humanism commends that a life lived with and for other people is potentially richer and riper in meaning than a life lived in isolation and one invested in little more than selfish pursuits. Again, perfectionism may not be in the cards for us, and life will always have its frustrations and problems. But I think that letting go of the ideal of the perfect life, whether delivered to us by slick advertisers or charismatic gurus spouting platitudes, I think letting go of that notion is a mark of wisdom and a maturing self. In engaging with life and coping with its inevitable problems, new opportunities can emerge. We can develop new skills and strengths and a renewed sense of adequacy about ourselves. And so we move along to confront another day. As one of my favorite lyricists, the sage Leonard Cohen, has wisely counseled, quote, "Ring the bells that can still ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in."